The story of Western philosophy begins in a place and time when the world was being reimagined. Ancient Greece, situated at the crossroads of East and West, bustled with traders, travelers, and ideas from distant lands. Here, amid lively cities and vibrant ports, a new way of thinking took root. A way that challenged old stories, questioned the authority of myth, and sought instead the clarity of reason. This transformation did not happen overnight, nor did it arise from nothing. Historians generally agree that earlier civilizations, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Persian, offered a wealth of wisdom and insight. Yet the Greeks developed a distinctive approach. They made questioning itself a virtue and placed rational inquiry at the very heart of their culture. The origins of Western philosophy, though sometimes shrouded in uncertainty, are traced most clearly to the thinkers now known as the pre-Socratics. Figures like Thales, Xenophanes, Pythagoras, and Heraclitus were among the first to move away from the supernatural explanations of the old poets. They sought to understand the universe not as the whim of gods, but as a system governed by principles that could, in theory, be discovered and discussed. This was a bold leap. The early Greek philosophers did not reject the existence of the divine outright, but they began asking questions that pointed beyond myth. What is everything made of? Is there a single substance underlying the changing world? Can we trust our senses, or is there a deeper logic behind appearances? These questions formed the earliest foundations of what we now recognize as philosophy and, indeed, as science. The pre-Socratics were public figures in their own right, engaging audiences in marketplaces and assemblies. Their approach was performative, almost theatrical, a new art of argument and demonstration. Thales, for example, is often credited as the first to propose that water is the fundamental substance of all things, not because of a mystical vision, but through observation and reasoning. Heraclitus famously claimed that everything is in flux, that change itself is the only constant. These early thinkers did not always agree, but together they set a precedent to question, to reason, and to seek answers through dialogue and debate. Greece's unique position as a trade hub helped foster this intellectual openness. The mingling of cultures, the exchange of goods and stories, and the relative freedom of thought in the city-states all contributed to an environment where radical questions could be asked. Unlike societies more tightly bound to tradition, the Greeks developed a curiosity that was both collective and competitive. Rival philosophers argued in public, and ideas were tested not just in private meditation, but in spirited discussion. This atmosphere was crucial in nurturing an ongoing tradition of philosophical inquiry. As the 6th and 5th centuries before the Common Era unfolded, the philosophical conversation grew richer and more complex. The subjects under consideration expanded to include not only the nature of the cosmos, but also mathematics, ethics, politics, and the structure of knowledge itself. Figures like Pythagoras introduced mathematical reasoning into philosophy, suggesting that numbers and ratios underpin the order of the universe. This was a remarkable step toward a more scientific worldview, one that would have profound consequences for later developments in both science and philosophy. Amid this ferment, a new figure appeared who would forever change the direction of Western thought: Socrates. Unlike the pre-Socratics, whose interests often focused on the stuff of the cosmos, Socrates was more concerned with the life of the mind and the conduct of the individual. He did not write philosophical treatises. Instead, he wandered the streets of Athens, engaging his fellow citizens in conversation and probing their beliefs. Socrates' method was simple but revolutionary. He would ask questions, expose contradictions in his interlocutors' views, and, through this dialectic process, guide them toward greater clarity or, sometimes, to the realization that they knew far less than they thought. The Socratic method, as it came to be known, was a form of disciplined debate that placed reason above tradition and embraced the possibility of error as a step toward truth. Socrates himself left no writings, but his student Plato became his chronicler and interpreter. Through a series of dialogues, Plato captured both the spirit and substance of Socratic inquiry. Yet Plato did more than record. He built upon his teacher's legacy, developing a sweeping philosophical system of his own. Central to Plato's thought was the theory of forms, a vision of abstract, perfect realities that stand behind the ever-changing world of experience. For Plato, the senses could deceive, but reason could lead us to unchanging truths. In his academy, Plato established a model for philosophical education that would endure for centuries, blending rigorous argument with a profound concern for ethical and political life. If Socrates and Plato marked the turn toward questions of ethics, knowledge, and reality, Aristotle, Plato's own student, brought extraordinary breadth and precision to the task. Aristotle's interests were vast: logic, biology, ethics, politics, metaphysics, and more. He was the first to formalize the rules of reasoning, developing a system of logic that would become foundational for later Western thought. Where Plato emphasized ideal forms, Aristotle looked to the particulars of the world, seeking to understand things as they are, in their natural contexts. His ethical thought centered on the concept of virtue and the pursuit of eudaimonia, a flourishing or well-lived life, remains influential. Aristotle's vision of the golden mean, the idea that virtue lies between extremes, offered a practical guide to living well. In his Lyceum, Aristotle trained generations of thinkers and set the stage for the integration of philosophy with scientific inquiry. The intellectual lineage that runs from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle is often regarded as the backbone of ancient Greek philosophy. This tradition did not end with them. In the centuries that followed, new schools emerged: the Epicureans, who sought happiness through the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain; the Cynics, who advocated for simplicity and the rejection of conventional desires; the Stoics, who emphasized virtue and self-control; and the Skeptics, who questioned whether certain knowledge was possible at all. These Hellenistic schools extended the conversation, adapting the principles of reason, ethics, and inquiry to new circumstances and challenges. What is perhaps most striking about this period is the Greeks' willingness to break with established explanations and pursue understanding through reasoned argument. Rather than accept the tales handed down by poets and priests, they asked why things were as they were and how we might come to know them. The Greeks did not reject tradition wholesale, but they insisted that claims must be examined, tested, and, if necessary, revised. In doing so, they laid the groundwork for a tradition of critical thinking that would shape not only philosophy but also science, mathematics, and the humanities. The preservation and transmission of ancient Greek philosophical and scientific texts was vital in ensuring that these ideas endured. Manuscripts copied and recopied over centuries would eventually reach the libraries and universities of later ages, providing the foundation for further inquiry and debate. The influence of the Greeks, then, lies not only in their answers, but in their questions. The insistence that reason, rather than mere custom, should guide our search for truth. As we look back to the birth of Western philosophy in ancient Greece, we find a culture marked by curiosity, flexibility, and a willingness to confront the unknown. The Greeks' embrace of rational inquiry, their passion for debate, and their integration of philosophy with every aspect of life set them apart from their contemporaries and established the principles that would guide Western thought for centuries to come. In asking what is real, what is good, and how we might know, they opened a path that countless others would follow, each generation adding its own voice to the great conversation that began so long ago in the streets and academies of Greece. As the embers of the ancient world cooled and new faiths swept across the Mediterranean, Western philosophy entered a profound period of transformation. The landscape of thought was no longer defined solely by questions of nature, logic, and ethics, but by the shimmering presence of the divine. Christianity, having emerged and spread despite adversity, now confronted the intellectual legacy of Greece and Rome. The encounter between religious faith and rational inquiry became the animating drama of medieval philosophy, shaping the contours of Western thought for centuries to come. At the heart of this transformation lay the challenge of reconciling the truths revealed in Scripture with the methods and achievements of classical philosophy. Early Christian thinkers found themselves heirs to a formidable intellectual tradition, yet also custodians of a faith rooted in revelation. They asked, could the light of reason illuminate the mysteries of faith, or did it threaten to eclipse them altogether? This tension was not a simple antagonism, but unfolded as a complex, evolving dialogue, a search for harmony marked by moments of conflict. Patristic philosophy, the tradition of early Christian thinkers, marked the initial stages of this encounter. These philosophers inherited not just Greek ideas, but also the tools for rigorous argument. They wrestled with how to express Christian doctrines, such as the nature of God or the problem of evil, using the language and logic of their pagan predecessors. The process was fraught with suspicion, for Greek philosophy was viewed by some as a rival to faith, its rational certainties potentially at odds with the mysteries declared by revelation. Yet there was also a hunger for the divine that Greek philosophy itself hinted at, a yearning for ultimate truth, which many believed could unite both faith and reason. Augustine of Hippo emerged as one of the earliest and most influential figures in this synthesis. Augustine's own intellectual journey mirrored the broader path of Western thought, drawn first to classical philosophy, especially the works of Plato and the later Neoplatonists. He eventually embraced Christianity, convinced that reason and faith need not be enemies. Augustine's writings reveal a deep engagement with pre-Christian philosophy, yet he did not simply import Greek ideas into Christian theology. Instead, he sought to reimagine them, adapting the structure of the mind, the nature of sin, and the reality of grace to fit a Christian framework. Augustine believed that faith was the starting point of understanding, but not its end. Believe so that you may understand, he urged, an approach that prioritized the act of faith yet insisted that understanding was its proper fruit. For Augustine, reason could clarify and defend the truths of belief. It could probe the mysteries of God, even if it could never fully comprehend them. His integration of Neoplatonism and Christian revelation became a model for later thinkers, forging a heritage in which philosophy and theology were intertwined, each enriching the other. He shaped not only doctrines of sin and grace, but also discussions about human freedom and the structure of the self-questions that would resonate through the centuries. Yet the encounter between faith and reason was never a settled affair. As Greek philosophy declined in the ancient world, the desire to explore, question, and explain persisted within the new Christian context. The medieval hunger for the divine was matched by a reverence for reason as a God-given faculty. The effort to reconcile these two, reason, with its demand for evidence and logic, faith, with its trust in the unseen, became the defining project of medieval philosophy. This project reached its fullest expression in the movement known as scholasticism. Medieval scholars working in Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew retrieved and translated ancient texts, constructing a vast commentary tradition that bridged cultures and centuries. The scholastics did not see philosophy and theology as isolated pursuits. Instead, they believed that reason could serve faith, clarifying doctrine, resolving apparent contradictions, and defending belief against criticism. At times, this alliance was uneasy. The specter of heresy haunted those who pressed reason too far, while others worried that faith might wither under the relentless scrutiny of logic. Still, the prevailing attitude was one of integration, a hope that, properly understood, faith and reason would be mutually reinforcing. No figure embodied this synthesis more thoroughly than Thomas Aquinas. Working in the 13th century, Aquinas drew on the newly available works of Aristotle, whose systematic approach to nature, ethics, and logic offered a powerful alternative to the earlier Platonic tradition. Aquinas' genius lay in his ability to integrate Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology without collapsing one into the other. He argued that philosophy and theology, while distinct, were both legitimate paths to truth. Philosophy, for Aquinas, operated by the natural light of reason, exploring what could be known by observation and logic. Theology, grounded in divine revelation, addressed truths inaccessible to human reason alone. Aquinas' most famous works, such as the Summa Theologiae, reflect a careful method. Questions are posed, objections weighed, and arguments built step by step. He maintained that certain truths, such as the existence of God, could be demonstrated by reason, while others, like the Trinity, rested on faith. This distinction did not diminish the value of either domain. Instead, it allowed for a respectful dialogue between them. Aquinas' model for the relationship between theology and philosophy became deeply influential, shaping Catholic doctrine and setting the terms for later debate. Central to Aquinas' thinking was the conviction that reason is not opposed to faith, but rather completes it. He saw natural law, the ethical order accessible to reason, as harmonious with the law revealed in Scripture. In his ethical writings, Aquinas developed a vision of human flourishing rooted in both rational reflection and divine guidance. His synthesis of Greek and Christian thought reshaped the intellectual landscape, providing a framework in which faith and reason could coexist and mutually illuminate one another. The differences between Augustine and Aquinas are instructive, reflecting shifts in both philosophical method and theological emphasis. Augustine, influenced by Plato and the Neoplatonists, tended to see reason as subordinate to faith, a tool for deepening one's understanding of mysteries already accepted. Aquinas, shaped by Aristotle, gave reason a more expansive role, confident that it could establish certain religious truths independently, yet both affirmed the complementarity of faith and reason, rejecting any absolute separation between the two. Throughout the medieval period, the relationship between faith and reason remained dynamic, a source of tension as well as creativity. The debates of this era would echo into modern times, as later philosophers revisited the question of whether religious belief can be justified by reason alone. Medieval thinkers were acutely aware of the limits of human understanding, but they also insisted that the pursuit of truth requires both humility and courage. Humility to accept the mysteries that transcend reason, and courage to question, analyze, and defend what one believes. The encounter between Greek philosophy and Christian faith was as much a process of transmission as of transformation. Early Christian writers appropriated the categories and methods of their pagan predecessors, translating them into new contexts and sometimes subverting their original meanings. The work of Augustine and Aquinas did not merely preserve ancient philosophy, it reimagined it, forging an intellectual heritage that would shape the universities, texts, and debates of the Western world. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, the enduring dialogue between faith and reason remained unresolved, but it had become an essential part of the Western intellectual tradition. The hunger for the divine, the reverence for reason, and the persistent effort to reconcile them. These threads, woven together in the medieval tapestry, continue to inform philosophical inquiry to this day. In the evolution of Western thought, the Middle Ages stand not as a period of darkness, but as an era of profound engagement where faith and reason met, wrestled, and, at times, embraced. As the medieval synthesis of faith and reason began to loosen its hold on Europe, a new spirit emerged, one that would transform Western thought and set the stage for the modern world. The Renaissance dawned not as a single event, but as a gradual and powerful revitalization, breathing new life into intellectual pursuits and recentering the human experience. At the heart of this transformation was Renaissance humanism. Unlike the religiously anchored studies of previous centuries, humanism placed its confidence in human potential, classical learning, and civic virtue. In the bustling cities of Italy and, eventually, across the continent, scholars gathered to recover the lost wisdom of Greece and Rome. This return to antiquity was not mere nostalgia, it was an active engagement with the texts, arts, and sciences of the ancient world, all viewed through the lens of what humanity could achieve. The spirit of Renaissance humanism was not content to accept inherited truths without question. Instead, humanists sought to harmonize the often conflicting philosophies of the past, sifting through Greek and Roman texts in search of insight and inspiration. Their worldview became centered on humanity itself, on the capacities, dignity, and agency of individuals, fostering a profound belief in human potential. With this came the spread of humanist education, which emphasized not only classical languages and literature but also the arts and sciences as vital paths toward understanding and improving the world. The influence of humanism extended far beyond university walls, shaping artists, writers, and crucially, later philosophers who would inherit both the spirit of inquiry and the tools of critical thought. As Renaissance ideas rippled outward, they began to erode the dominance of feudal structures and religious orthodoxy. The rediscovery of classical texts encouraged a sense of individualism and curiosity, while the decline of medieval institutions opened space for new forms of philosophical exploration. This was not a clean break with the past, but a gradual transition, one in which the boundaries between inherited faith and emergent reason were continually negotiated. The Renaissance, with its renewed focus on the arts, sciences, and the potential of the human mind, laid crucial groundwork for the next great period of intellectual upheaval, the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment, which emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries, is often characterized as an age of reason, a time when thinkers sought to illuminate the world through rational inquiry, empirical investigation, and a relentless questioning of traditional authority. While Renaissance humanism had recentered the human experience, the Enlightenment aimed to dissect and understand it, using new methods and more systematic approaches. Its roots can be traced to the scientific revolution, which had already begun to transform the ways individuals understood nature, society, and the cosmos. The Enlightenment took this further, applying methods of logic and observation not only to the physical world, but also to questions of politics, ethics, and epistemology. Central to the Enlightenment was the conviction that reason could drive intellectual progress and foster a more just and equitable society. This belief led to the critique of established authorities, whether in the church, the monarchy, or the aristocracy. Thinkers of the period championed ideals of liberty, progress, and the separation of church and state, laying the philosophical foundations for the political modernization that would shape the centuries to come. The Enlightenment was not a uniform movement, but rather a broad and sometimes contentious reorientation of European thought. The questioning of traditional authority became a hallmark of the age, with writers and philosophers challenging inherited dogmas and advocating for new forms of knowledge, governance, and social order. A vibrant debate emerged at the heart of Enlightenment philosophy, one that would define the contours of modern thought, the contest between rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism, associated with figures such as René Descartes, asserted that reason itself is the primary source of knowledge. Rationalists argued that certain truths could be grasped by the mind alone, without recourse to sensory experience. In contrast, empiricists, whose lineage traces back to ancient sophists, but who found their strongest voices in philosophers like John Locke, insisted that knowledge arises from experience and observation. The world, they claimed, is to be understood through the senses, with the mind serving as a reflective instrument rather than an autonomous generator of truth. Descartes stands as a towering figure in this landscape, renowned for his methodical doubt and his insistence that the search for certainty must begin with the self-evident truths of reason. His famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am," epitomizes the rationalist faith in the mind's power to establish a secure foundation for knowledge. Descartes' influence extended beyond epistemology, shaping metaphysics and the development of a mechanistic worldview that would become prominent in Western thought. Rationalist thinkers such as Spinoza and Leibniz continued this tradition, each seeking to build comprehensive systems of thought grounded in the clarity and necessity of reason. Yet the empiricist challenge could not be ignored. John Locke, for example, rejected the notion of innate ideas and argued that all knowledge begins with experience. In his view, the mind at birth is a blank slate, shaped by impressions gathered through the senses. Locke's empiricism invited a more democratic approach to knowledge, one that emphasized the accessibility of truth through careful observation and reflection. Later empiricists, such as Berkeley and Hume, pushed these ideas further, interrogating the reliability of the senses and the limits of human understanding. This debate, rationalism versus empiricism, became one of the central philosophical struggles of the Enlightenment. The tension between these positions spurred further inquiry as philosophers sought to clarify the origins and boundaries of knowledge. Immanuel Kant, writing at the close of the Enlightenment, famously attempted to synthesize these rival approaches. Kant argued that while all knowledge begins with experience, the mind plays an active role in shaping how that experience is understood. In his philosophy, the categories of reason structure the raw data of the senses, making knowledge possible. This reconciliation pointed the way toward new themes in modern philosophy, where the interplay between subject and object, mind and world, would become enduring questions. The Enlightenment's influence did not remain confined to the realm of epistemology or metaphysics. Its ideals transformed political philosophy as well. The emphasis on reason, liberty, and progress inspired thinkers to envision new forms of government, ones based on consent, equality, and the rights of individuals. The notion of separating religious and political authority was especially radical, challenging centuries of tradition and fueling movements for reform and revolution. The Enlightenment thus shaped not only the content of philosophical inquiry, but also the very structure of modern society, informing democratic ideals and institutions that continue to resonate today. Underlying these intellectual developments was a profound confidence in the power of human reason to understand and improve the world. The mechanistic worldview that took hold during this time, seeing nature as a system of laws discoverable by the mind, further reinforced the idea that humanity could master its environment and shape its own destiny. Scientific and technological progress accelerated, opening new vistas for philosophical reflection and practical action alike. As the Enlightenment gave way to modernity, Western philosophy was transformed in both substance and scope. The transition from medieval to modern thought was marked by the rise of scientific inquiry, technological innovation, and a philosophical orientation that privileged critical reasoning over inherited tradition. The debates of the Enlightenment between faith and reason, rationalism and empiricism, authority and liberty, did not disappear. Rather, they were reframed and carried forward, shaping the questions and methods of modern philosophy. In the modern era, the legacy of the Renaissance and Enlightenment remains unmistakable. The belief in human potential, the commitment to reason and experience, and the persistent questioning of authority all continue to influence how individuals and societies understand themselves and their place in the world. While the contours of philosophical inquiry have shifted over time, the themes forged in these transformative centuries, humanism, empiricism, rationality, and the pursuit of progress, continue to animate the ongoing evolution of Western thought. The story of Western philosophy, as it moves through the 20th and into the 21st century, is marked by a restless search for meaning amid rapid cultural, scientific, and technological change. The questions philosophers ask shift in tone and content, shaped by the traumas and triumphs of modern history and the accelerating pace of innovation. This era witnesses the rise of new philosophical currents, existentialism, analytic and continental traditions, and a deepening inquiry into language, mind, and society, all grappling with the complexities of contemporary life in ways both familiar and strikingly new. Emerging from the shadow of two world wars and profound uncertainty, existentialism becomes one of the defining movements of the 20th century. It is less a school than a mood or orientation, united by concerns about authenticity, freedom, and the challenge of finding meaning in a world that often seems indifferent or even absurd. The existentialist thinkers such as Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, Albert Camus, Martin Heidegger, Soren Kierkegaard, and Friedrich Nietzsche do not offer a single doctrine, but rather a constellation of approaches joined by the conviction that existence precedes essence. In other words, they maintain that individuals are not defined by any prior essence, nature, or social category. Instead, each person must create themselves through acts of choice and commitment. For the existentialist, freedom is both exhilarating and daunting, for it brings the burden of responsibility, the knowledge that, in choosing for oneself, one also sets an example for others. This emphasis on individual experience and responsibility resonates beyond philosophy, shaping literature, theater, psychology, and even the visual arts. Existentialist themes of alienation, anxiety, and rebellion echo in the novels of Camus and the plays of Sartre, as well as in the post-war climate of disillusionment and the search for authenticity. The existentialist call to live authentically, true to one's own values rather than conforming blindly to social expectations, strikes a chord in a century marked by ideological upheaval and the specter of totalitarianism. It is no coincidence that existentialism flourishes in a Europe scarred by conflict, where old certainties have been shattered and the need for personal meaning becomes urgent. The movement's core principles, individual freedom, responsibility, and the quest for meaning, extend their influence well beyond academic philosophy, leaving a lasting imprint on 20th century culture. While existentialism explores the drama of individual existence, the philosophical landscape of the 20th century is also shaped by a deepening divide between two broad traditions, analytic and continental philosophy. This split, often called the analytic-continental divide, is not merely a matter of geography, though analytic philosophy is most closely associated with the English-speaking world and continental philosophy with mainland Europe. Rather, the divide reflects differences in style, method, and focus. Analytic philosophy, which takes root in Britain and the United States, aspires to the clarity and rigor of the sciences. Its practitioners often concentrate on logic, language, and the analysis of concepts, seeking to resolve philosophical problems through careful argumentation and attention to detail. This tradition values precision, logical structure, and the pursuit of objectivity, favoring concise essays and a piecemeal approach to philosophical questions. Continental philosophy, by contrast, is less concerned with technical analysis and more attentive to history, society, and the broader sweep of human experience. Its themes are often existential, phenomenological, or hermeneutic, exploring the structures of consciousness, the interpretation of meaning, and the shaping of human identity by culture and power. Continental philosophers tend to write in a more literary or speculative style, drawing on art, literature, and the social sciences. Their work is sometimes criticized as obscure or difficult, but it is driven by a desire to grapple with the big questions of existence, meaning, and society. This divide is not absolute. Philosophers often borrow from both traditions, and the boundaries shift over time. But it shapes the academic landscape and the way philosophical problems are framed. The analytic tradition's emphasis on scientific rigor has led to advances in the philosophy of language, logic, and mind, as well as fruitful collaborations with mathematics, linguistics, and cognitive science. The continental tradition, for its part, has inspired critical theory, postmodernism, and ongoing debates about power, identity, and the nature of reality. The two approaches have sometimes regarded each other with skepticism, but they share a common concern: to make sense of the human condition in an age of uncertainty and change. One of the most significant developments in 20th century philosophy is the so-called linguistic turn, the realization that many philosophical problems are, at their core, problems about language. For both analytic and continental thinkers, language comes to be seen not merely as a tool for expressing thought, but as a fundamental medium that shapes the very possibility of meaning, knowledge, and reality. Philosophers scrutinize the structure of sentences, the role of context, and the subtle ways in which words shape what can be thought or known. This focus on language gives rise to new fields such as the philosophy of language, which investigates how words refer, how meaning is constructed, and how communication succeeds or fails. Philosophers of mind, meanwhile, examine the relationship between mental states and linguistic expression, probing the boundaries between thought, perception, and the external world. These inquiries do not remain confined to philosophy. They spill over into linguistics, computer science, and cognitive psychology, leading to interdisciplinary research that blurs the line between philosophy and the sciences. The study of artificial intelligence, for example, raises urgent questions about the nature of thought, understanding, and consciousness. Can a machine truly understand language, or is human meaning something fundamentally different from computation? These debates, once limited to academic journals, have become matters of public concern as artificial intelligence and language models increasingly shape daily life, from digital assistants to automated translation. Philosophers now find themselves at the center of discussions about the ethics, risks, and possibilities of new technologies, as well as the future of human identity and agency in a world where the boundaries between mind and machine are growing less clear. The philosophy of mind, too, has been transformed by developments in neuroscience, psychology, and artificial intelligence. Traditional questions about the relationship between mind and body, or the nature of consciousness, are recast in light of new discoveries about the brain and the simulation of thought by computers. Some philosophers argue that understanding the mind requires a fundamentally interdisciplinary approach, drawing on insights from biology, computation, and the study of language. Others continue to insist on the irreducibility of subjective experience, pointing to the so-called hard problem of consciousness, the question of why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to the felt quality of experience. These debates are ongoing, and there is little consensus, but they reflect the vibrant, evolving character of philosophy in the 21st century. Beyond the traditional boundaries of metaphysics and epistemology, contemporary philosophy is increasingly preoccupied with the challenges posed by new technologies, global interconnectedness, and the shifting landscape of social and political life. Philosophers grapple with questions about the nature and limits of artificial intelligence, the ethical implications of digital surveillance, and the meaning of creativity in an age of algorithmic art. These are not simply technical problems, but reflections of deeper anxieties about what it means to be human in a world transformed by science and technology. In this context, philosophical reflection remains as vital as ever, offering frameworks for understanding and evaluating the unprecedented changes that define the present age. If the history of Western philosophy is a story of transformation, the contemporary period is marked by a willingness to question even the boundaries between disciplines, traditions, and methods. Philosophers today move fluidly between analytic precision and continental depth, between the study of logic and the interpretation of culture, between the analysis of language and the mysteries of the mind. The field is more pluralistic than ever before, open to new voices and perspectives, and attuned to the complexities of a rapidly changing world. While the questions evolve, the impulse to reflect, to question, and to seek meaning endures. In this way, Western thought continues to reinvent itself, even as it carries forward the restless curiosity that has animated it from its beginnings.